Welcome to episode 8 of the 10 and 2 men Jin tutorial level. We're only going to build a couple of new rooms this time, where we'll add the final puzzle to let Lara leave the tomb. We'll add a camera that tracks Lara, as well as some effect lights, and then look at scripting and the basics we need to make a functioning level. We'll also add some nice visual and sound effects to really add atmosphere, such as water sounds, lava, texture sounds, bump maps, reverb, and distance fog. From this room then, let's create a portal out. It's about 8 blocks long. We're going to add a puzzle hole, which is where Lara's going to put the full Eye of Horus. But this puzzle hole is quite large. It's 12 clicks high. I'm just going to make this room go downwards. So bringing these down each by 2 click slopes. And I'll do the same thing with the ceiling. Although in this last bit, because the puzzle hole is 12 clicks tall, I want to make this area 12 clicks tall. Looking at the bottom, it goes from -6 to 2, so we've got 8. So I need to raise it up by 4 to make it work. I'm going to change the ceiling here. I'm not quite happy with how it looks. There we go. It's a little bit more of a gentle transition. Point about puzzle holes. You might notice if you go down the list a little bit, you'll see puzzle done as well. Puzzle holes have 2 slots. You've got the puzzle hole and then the puzzle done. This is because sometimes when you add the puzzle item, you might want the object to change. So when Lara adds that object, it transforms into the puzzle done object automatically. This puzzle done object actually has animations and it will open up. So it's a bit like a door. Let's add it. Make sure that you're adding the puzzle hole object and not the puzzle done. I'm going to bring it in there. And notice it's quite angular at the edges. I'm going to bring up the floor to make the puzzle hole fit quite nicely. Let's create a trigger for this puzzle hole. Select the object and the square in front. I also want to give an indication to the player that this is a significant moment. This is the final puzzle and she's basically done with the tomb. So let's trigger a music track. I'm going to add a classic trigger for this on the square. Add a trigger. The what needs to be play audio, and parameter, I'm going to add track number 42. There is a bit of an issue here if we go in game. Whenever Lara comes close to the puzzle hole, and let's say she turns around and runs back, the camera's going to switch behind. And we don't want the player to see the back of this puzzle hole because it's untextured, plus it also blocks the view. So let's create a camera that whenever Lara comes into this area, it switches to a camera from about here. Lara herself is going to be the target, so it will follow her. Let's add a camera. And I'm going to place it about there. If we add a classic trigger for this, it will actually overlap with the puzzle hole trigger from here. Problem with that is the engine will think that this camera should only be triggered when the puzzle hole is completed, but we don't want that. And this is where a volume trigger can be really useful. They can overlap with classic triggers without affecting each other. I'm going to press Alt and V and add a volume trigger. You could also use the icons that we added up here before. And I need to resize it just so it covers all 6 of these blocks. Before we add a trigger to this then, let's rename this camera. You can give any object a name, and this is helpful for scripting. You might end up with lots of cameras, and then it becomes really difficult to work out which camera is which. So right-click the object and then rename object. Let's just call it puzzle_camera. If you add names to objects that contain more than one word, you'll need to put an underscore between them so that the scripting works properly. And then double-click on the center of the volume, and it brings up the node editor. Let's create a new volume event, and we'll call it puzzle camera. Remember that with volume triggers, you have 3 options: when Lara enters, when she's inside it, and when she leaves. With this one, we want the camera to be triggered whenever Lara is inside the volume. So on volume inside makes sense here. Select that, right-click the node editor, type in camera, and it will automatically bring up the view options. And if we scroll down slightly, you'll find activate camera. Double click. The second option here is which camera to choose. This is where naming the object is really useful. Select puzzle camera, and then activator is what the camera is going to track. We want it to just track Lara, so we can type that in and it will select Lara. Make sure activators, that Lara herself activates the trigger. Make sure that the volume is enabled. And then call count should be 0. We want this to be triggered indefinitely whenever she enters that area, not just once. Click OK. And so it should now be set up. We're going to create one more corridor, and this will bring Lara eventually out to the outside room. If we take a look at our level as a whole, and if you can't see all the rooms, you can toggle the rooms up here with draw all rooms and also draw portals. We're going to create quite a large outdoor room, and I don't want that room to overlap with this part of the level. So with our next room, which is going to be a corridor outwards, I'm just going to bring it down this way, and then we'll have our outside room here. So create a new room, and we'll need to resize it. This room is 10 blocks down in this direction and 7 blocks wide. The exact size isn't too important as long as we make it wider in this direction towards the right. I'm going to add a wall there, and then in the end, this is going to be a corridor. And in this last bit, Lara's going to run down the middle here in another type of corridor. I've left these open for now because I'm going to create 2 alcoves where I want baddies to jump out at her as she's trying to run out. She's not going to get out too easily. So I'm going to bring down the ceiling first because it's a bit too high. I've brought it down to 4 clicks. Let's create the alcoves at the side. And we'll add a baddie into each one. Some enemies, especially human enemies, you can add an object code bit, an OCB, and it will dictate what kind of animations they use. Select the first baddie and add an OCB of 2. And what this will do, the baddie will then jump to the left in dramatic fashion. The other baddie, let's add an OCB 1, and this one will then jump to the right. Add triggers. I've added this trigger here, so that way Lara is quite close to the baddie when the baddie jumps out. With this one, I'm going to add it a little bit further back, so we get a better view of the baddie jumping out. I also want one of the baddies to drop some Uzi ammo, so I'm going to add it underneath. I've realized I've created a wafer thin wall here, and we can't have that. My quick fix is just to add a wall here. So the rooms are ready to texture and light. You might find that when you create slopes, that when you bring down the lines on the wall, that you might need to adjust them a little bit. Remember that if you just click on the side, make sure that arrows are pointing towards a particular corner. In this case, I want to bring up this corner here, so I'm going to keep clicking until the arrow is pointed there. I know it's divider 1, and then bring it up. So when this puzzle hole opens outwards after Lara adds the puzzle piece, it's going to go into the walls. And just to create the illusion that there's some sort of gap, there's a special texture at the bottom of the texture set, and we can add it and just make sure it's rotated properly so that it creates kind of gap like this consistently. With lighting, I've added a point light towards the end of this room because in the next lesson, we're going to create an outdoor room exactly at this point. So I've preempted some sunset light coming in from the end. But there's one more light bulb that we haven't actually used yet, and it's called an effect light. If you go to the lighting panel down here, click effect and add it onto a square. I'm just going to add it to the floor here. What an effect light does, it just adds light to that particular surface, and it affects a little bit of the surfaces around it, but it doesn't affect any of the objects, like when Lara goes over it. And it can be quite nice if you just want to add a little bit of brightness or darkness to a particular square. So I've made this a little bit brighter. I can obviously change the color slightly, maybe to a reddish. We're done with room building for this lesson, but as we're getting close to the end, we want to make it into a functional level. So there are a couple of things we need to do with scripting. Go to Tomb IDE and on the left, click Script. By default, gameflow.lua should be open. If it isn't, if you go to the File Explorer on the right and then the Levels folder, Then gameflow.lua is here. So scripting in 10 uses the industry standard Lua language, and gameflow.lua is the main script file. Think of it as how your game is pieced together, what order your levels come in, and it has all of the general settings for each level. If you're familiar with Lua scripting language, then all of this will be a piece of cake. But if you're like me and know very little about coding and scripting, let me say this: you don't have to learn Lua to make a level. You can easily get by copying and pasting lines from tutorials and documentation and just changing numbers and names here and there. You might even get the hang of it pretty quickly and create some more advanced setups. But to make a fully playable level, you might be surprised how little scripting you need. Loads of puzzle setups can just be handled by volume triggers and nodes, and they're dead easy to use. What we do have to add to our script files, though, are some things like the names of puzzle pieces and keys. Taking a look at the main file, gameflow.lua, the first options are general settings for the game. The third one is about the total number of secrets. We've only added one secret, and our game only has this one level, so we can change this number to 1. Where it says enable fly cheat, remember that's what we used earlier when we pressed the O key, help us test the level more quickly. If we release this level, we probably don't want the player to cheat by doing the same thing, so we can just change this true to false. But scroll down further, and you'll notice that our game has 2 levels in essence. One is the title level. This is when you load up the game and the player has to start a new game or load a previous game, and that counts as a level. By default, there's already one there, which just has an image. And then you've got our level, which we named earlier as level 1. The name we gave earlier, though, is more just for the scripting. We don't actually have to call it level 1 if we don't want to. And so let's give it a new name. In level1.nameKey, this is the title of the level, and I've put in Tomb here. You could feel free to put something more exciting. When we created our project, we entered 107 as our ambient track. You'll notice that in the script here, that's the ambient track that plays when you start the game. We also added a horizon. We'll talk about that more when we create the outside rooms. So go into your playable tutorial folder, and where we put the tutorial files, go to scripting notes. And there is a text file there called scripts. Open that, and we want to copy and paste this block into the gameflow.lua file. Leave the bits at the bottom for now. I'm going to paste them just on the next line below the loading screen. If at the beginning, if you didn't call it level 1, then you'll need to change the level 1 here to the same as what these say, whatever you called it. The first one is a sky layer. We'll talk about this next lesson a bit more, so I'll leave that for now. The next one is distance fog. Distance fog, which is where at a certain distance from Lara, you create a mist effect. I think it works quite well for a tomb because it can help make it seem a little bit dusty. And so these 3 values are the RGB values of the color. So you've got red, green, and blue. You can use an image editing program or just Google a color wheel to find a nice color and also what the RGB values would be. This is a sort of brownish color, which I think fits well for a sandy tomb. And these 2 numbers, these decide where the distance fog begins and where it ends in the number of blocks. I've put 4, so I want the fog effect to actually start just 4 blocks away from Lara, and then 30 is the maximum, and that's where it becomes full thick fog. And then below are the puzzle objects and keys. In the level, Lara has to pick up 2 half eyes and then combine them into 1 eye. This bit is the actual slot name, and you'll notice this from the WAD, and from that drop-down menu we use, they're the slot names. The next ones affect how it appears on screen, both when you pick up the object, but also when you go into the inventory. These are set so they should work well already, but when you create your own game, you'll need to play around with these values. It's worth just leaving them as 0 initially, then pick up the item in game, look at it at the inventory, and then decide, do I need to make it bigger, smaller, move it up or down the screen? Is it rotating in the right direction? So this first number decides whether you need to move the object up or down. If it's above 0, then it will go down slightly, and this is in number of units. So 100 is just a little bit further down. The next number is how close it is, how zoomed in. The default value for me was far too large, so I've put it as 0.5 so the camera is zoomed out a little bit. If the object isn't upright in the inventory and when you pick it up, then you can rotate it with these three values. The first one is the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. For us, both of these objects naturally are standing upright, so I don't actually need to change any of this. The rotation axis is which axis, x, y, or z, you want the object to rotate when you see it in the inventory. It makes sense for these ones to just be the y-axis, the top to bottom axis, so that's why it's y. The next one just always needs to be -1, and the last two things are what you can do with this object. So with this, Lara could use the object, but she also wants to be able to combine it. The other objects that we've got, there's just one, there's just the use. Once Lara combines these two, automatically it goes to puzzle item 1, which is the combined version, so we also have to add it. We had the two jars, which are both puzzle item 2, so we need to call one jar 1 and jar 2. And then we've got the trapdoor key, and this was key item 1. Now open strings.lua from the right-hand side. Strings are the names of things. By default, you've got inventory item strings for the weapons and medipacks and a few other things. On the left is the Lua ID, but on the right, that's the actual text you want to see in-game. Then you've got the level name strings. Remember that we changed our level to tomb, so we want to change this to exactly the same, to tomb. And now we want to add some new strings for our levels, because we want to decide what those puzzle and key objects are actually called. In the text file from earlier, copy and paste this bit at the bottom, and just add it below the level name strings. You can add notes to yourself, and it's a good idea to do this by pressing the dash twice. It will grey out, and I'm going to add here tomb level strings, and that helps keep everything organized. On the left, we've got the Lua name, and on the right is what we want it to appear as in the inventory. So the two halves of the eye I've called first half eye for half eye 1 and second half eye for half eye 2. When she combines the two, I want it to be called Eye of Horus. With the jars, what will happen when she picks them up is that they will stack on top of each other. So it will actually say 2 times and then the name. So we don't want to give them different names. We're just going to call them the same name. So I've put canopic jar. And then the trapdoor key I've just called trapdoor key. Notice at the end of each string line, there's a comma. That's part of the scripting language. Because we added all of these new string lines, we just need to go back to what used to be the last one and add a comma. Otherwise, the level won't load properly, and the one at the end, we don't need to add a comma there. Save the file. Also go back to gameflow.lua and save the file. Let's go into game and test out that the scripting works. I've moved Lara into this room so we can also test out the new part of the level that we've made. If when you try and build the level, it crashes, it's possibly because there's a scripting error. It should automatically tell you what that error is, but if it doesn't bring up this screen, which is the log file, go to our playable tutorial level file, go onto engine, and then down to the folder logs, find the most recent one, and it will bring up that screen. So here it says a Lua error occurred, and it gives you a clue as to the file, so it's strings.lua, and then the line number, which is 79. It may also give you some more helpful detail. Let's imagine we hadn't added that comma in the strings.lua, and that's what created the error in this case. It said line 79. Basically, it means that there's some issue at this line. You might need to look around it as well. And one of the most common ones is simply a missing comma. And so let's add that. If after editing the script, it's causing you trouble and you just want to solve the situation quickly, go into the scripting notes folder of the tutorial level files and you'll find strings.lua and gameflow.lua and put them in the playable tutorial folder, go to engine, scripts, and then just copy and paste them into this folder. Here's a nice trick for testing. Remember that we used the fly cheat by pressing the O button. If you press Shift and O, Lara does this little jump. And what you've done then is if you look at the inventory, you've actually added all of the inventory items like keys and puzzle pieces. And this is nice if you want to check out whether your scripting has worked. And you can notice the objects are rotating in the right direction. They're the right size. We've got the right names. So we've done some good scripting. To create extra atmosphere, we can add some more visual and sound effects to the level. Let's look at some visual effects first. The first one is Bumpmaps. Take a look at the right below the texture panel and you'll see the Bumpmaps option. Click it. Bumpmaps is a nice way of making textures look more three-dimensional. This can be quite useful for rocks or lettering or bricks. And in this drop-down menu, you've got 3 different levels of bump mapping. That just dictates how strong the bump mapping is. You'll need to experiment with this just to make sure it looks right. Let's highlight the hieroglyphic textures. Because bump mapping should work quite well on this, I'm going to use the strongest level, level 3, and then don't forget to click Assign Bump Map. I'm going to do the same thing with the other hieroglyphic textures. With some of the bricked walls, I'm going to add Bump Map level 2. And then at the very bottom, we've got some rock textures. We haven't used these yet. We're going to use these for the outside rooms, but I'm going to add Bump Map level 1 to these. Feel free to look at all the other textures and assign bump maps if you want. Click OK. We can also add some text onto the screen, and when we start the level, I want it to say something at the bottom. And remember that volume events is where we can do a lot of advanced stuff. So let's go to Edit and Volume Event Sets, create a new event, and let's call it Text at Start. We want it to appear whenever Lara enters the volume, so on volume enter is fine. Right-click in the node panel and you can go down to Text and then Draw Text for a time span. We don't want that text to be on the screen the entire time. Here we have a few options then. On the right, here we can have time span in seconds. I think 5 seconds is a good amount of time. In this box is the actual text. I'm going to put here somewhere in Egypt, ... The next boxes on the right are the X position and the Y position. Think of the screen as going from 0 to 100 in both directions. I'm going to add 5 to the X position, so it's just to the right of the left of the screen. And then I'm going to add 90 to the Y position, which means it's brought all the way down to the bottom, but not entirely. I want the text to be left aligned. You can add effects to it, flat, shadow, blinking, or shadow and blinking. I'm just going to keep it as normal text, so leave it as flat. White, I think, will work because it should stand out from the textures. And then we can change the scale if we feel that it's going to be too big or too small. I don't want the text to be too big, so I'm going to change the scale down to 0.6. And you can also add a transparency level if you want. I'm just going to leave it as the default, so not transparent. We only want Lara to trigger this once, so call count 1. Make sure that the activator is Lara. Let's trigger it as soon as the level starts. So Lara is going to be back on this platform. I'm going to select those 4 squares, add a trigger, trigger type, just normal trigger, and what needs to be a volume event. Reset the parameters so you can see them all. Text at the start. Okay. While we've got these blocks selected, I think we should add a music track to the beginning as well. So I'm just going to add another trigger for play audio, and this time it's track 65. Speaking of sound effects, there's some other nice atmospheric sound effects that we can add to the level. Remember this stacked room we created earlier and the water room at the bottom? We want to add a sound effect so Lara can hear that there's water around whenever she's down here. So go up to the top toolbar and select Add Sound Source and place it just on top of the water. Put it into the middle and then double click on the icon and you have a list of all of the sound effects that are loaded into the level. Type in water. The first sound that will come up is the underwater door. We don't want that. Click again and then we've got water loop. You can play the sound if you want to hear what it sounds like. Sounds good to me. So let's add it. Remember the lava room? Let's add a lava sound effect. So go to the top, add sound source and add it. This time I'm actually going to bring up the sound source a bit higher from the lava itself. That's because Lara doesn't actually go down here unless she wants to die, and I want her to be able to hear it whenever she's crossing the bridge. Do the same thing, double click, type in lava, and it should come up with TR1 lava loop. Another sound effect. Remember this light beam? We can imagine that it creates some sort of noise. So I'm going to add a sound effect just there and raise it up to the light beam. And then type in the search box light, and it should come up with TR4 light beam loop. I'm going to copy and paste that higher up as well, just so it can be heard all the way along the light beam. When we add extra sound effects to the level, we just need to make sure that they will be loaded into the game itself. To do that, go to Tools and Level Settings, go down to Sound Infos. And as we did at the beginning when we loaded in our second WAD, we want to make sure that when the level is compiled, that any sounds that are added are compiled with the level. To save on space, the editor is not going to add all possible sounds, so it's worth just every now and then clicking Auto Detect, and then it will detect any kind of sounds that you might have added to the level. Another sound effect are texture sound effects. And this affects Lara's foot sound. So whenever she's on sand or mud or brick or metal, we want to actually hear those sounds. Below the texture panel, click Sounds. And a bit like with Bumpmaps, you can select the textures with the drop-down menu and decide what sound it's going to make. At the top right, we have a kind of sandy texture. So I'm going to select all of those. It automatically splits into 64 by 64 blocks. So since we're using 256 by 256. We want to make sure that they're all selected. Go down to Sand, Assign Sound. In one of the recent rooms, we added a metal texture. It's just below this lava texture. I'm going to select all of that and then Metal. Very bottom, we haven't used these textures yet, but in the outside room, we've got some more sand. So I'm going to just select the ones that have sand on. There's also a mud texture that we'll use outside. And then a nice one, I think, for tombs or palaces is the marble texture. So just find any textures where Lara walks on that you think should have a sort of more clicky sound effect with her feet to make it sound like marble. For instance, I'm going to choose all of these. And then the last extra sound effect is reverb. So depending on the size of the room or the type of the room, you might want to hear a slight echo in some of the sounds from Lara's footsteps or from when she shoots her guns. Starting in the first room, I'm going to add a reverb effect to some rooms. The first room is quite small, so it's not going to be massively echoey, but with a slight touch of echo. Go to the reverb option here, and the drop-down menu will give you some options. I'm going to choose small reverb for this room. In the next room, this one is larger. Also, it's kind of empty, so you're probably going to hear a little bit more of an echo sound. So I'm going to choose reverb and medium. Do the same with the next one. The sloping room probably wouldn't have too much of an echo. I'm going to click small, but notice that pipe is an option. If you really want to have an echoey sound that reverbs a lot, pipe can be a good option. I'm not quite sure it works for this, so I'm going to select small. But then in this stacked room, we're going to have a much more echoey sound, I think. So starting in the top room, I'm going to click large as reverb, but we need to add it to each of the rooms. Feel free to go through all the rooms in the level and add reverb as you see fit. Let's test out some of these things. So don't forget to put Lara in the first room again so that we can see whether the text and the music works, and we can also check out the reverb sounds. So right click and move Lara. The text looks good, music's playing. Notice that when we walk around we can hear sound, and that with sand and mud it actually applies some footprints automatically. You can also see the distance fog effect that we added. It's a sort of little mistiness to the back there. I think that's quite nice for a tomb. There's a little bit of a reverb effect. You can particularly hear it when she puts her guns away. In this top room, we've got some really nice echoey reverb. You can hear the water, the lava, and the light beam. So what did we learn this time? We added some special animations to baddies. We used effect lights. We learned about the scripting basics, including adding some extra effects, but also the names of items like puzzle objects and keys, bump maps, texture sounds, reverb settings, distance fog, placing sound effects, and also adding text on screen. Still to come, it's the final part of the tutorial. Lara finally gets to escape, but not before she has to fight some baddies, and we're also going to add some animated objects and generally create some outside rooms. Not forgetting perhaps the most important trigger of all, the finish trigger.